The Rainbow Tower. Written by Alex Tymms. Illustrated by R H Stewart. Episode 29. Orange. Jed stared down the huge expanse of glass. If his head hadn't been spinning, he would have sworn it was just a huge floor that he could have walked on. "You ready?" Fox shouted above the noise of the wind. He'd rigged up a gantry from scaffold poles that stuck out over the 2-mile drop down to the ground far below. Near him was coiled more rope than Jed had ever seen before, hooked onto a harness that pinched him a bit. Jed nodded. His mouth was too dry to speak, and part of him was worried that if he did say anything, it would be to admit that he really didn't want to do this. However, he had no choice. "Take this." Fox handed him a knife, "just in case," as Jed stowed it in his overalls. "And you don't need me to tell you it's windy." Jed swung out and leant backwards, gripping the rope as his stomach somersaulted. He was now standing with his feet on the side of the building, breathing hard. His stomach at last settled into something near normal. "You're not going face first?" It was Phillips leaning out and grinning. "Good luck," he bawled. "And remember," Fox said, ignoring his brother, "follow the rainwater channel straight down. It'll take you right there. And be careful." Jed nodded and lowered himself down. As soon as he began to move, the wind tried to whip him sideways, but he soon found he could compensate for it. The fact it was a steady blast rather than unpredictable gusts made it a bit easier. He descended beyond the construction levels, following the vertical rain channel. All the offices he passed in red were either empty or full of boxes, as if the people were moving. At first, he'd been very careful to tread as softly as possible in case anyone heard him, but the further he went down and the more empty floors he passed, the less concerned he became. This wasn't the only thing he noticed. He also found that the longer the rope became, the stranger the whistle it emitted. The wind made it whine constantly. Jed reached the first line of ducts. Instead of cleaning the glass, they appeared to be staining it. Streaks of mucus ran down from each outlet, making the building look like it had been crying and not bothered to wipe the tears away. Given the mass eating its way up, Jed felt the building had every reason to weep. At last, the red-tinted glass gave way to orange. Instead of walking, Jed was now bouncing down a few floors at a time, crashing his feet onto the glass. He zoomed down, landed with a thump, then froze in horror. These offices were full of people, organising and reorganising their things. He stood stock still, hoping that no one had heard him and praying the glass was mirrored on the inside like yellow. Standing there, he noticed that some of the people were packing up while others were spreading out their possessions. Jed wondered what was going on, and much to his relief, no one turned to inspect the glass, seeming too preoccupied with what they were doing, and after a while he moved off. He went back to being careful and stopped trying to see how far he could lower himself between landings. Walking down, it appeared that every office was either being moved or reorganised. Then below him, Jed saw another line of staining. These were the ducts he was after, and would lead him right to new HR. Jed approached them and was about to swing straight into the nearest one when he realised he couldn't go in feet first, as he would find it near impossible to crawl along the duct facing the wrong way. Instead, he would have to lower himself down beyond the opening and crawl back up into it. While abseiling, Jed had felt comfortable and confident, not thinking about the huge drop below him. Now he was dangling by his fingertips, trying to drag himself into a slime-covered hole in the glass. He felt very exposed. The mucus made the pipe surface slippery, and it was with great difficulty that Jed found himself inside the pipe on his front, panting. He was covered from head to foot in grime and filth, and his fingers were only just mobile enough to unhitch the climbing ropes and harness. He let his gear go, and it swung back out the circular opening, leaving the long, dark pipe stretching out ahead of him. His only option now was to go forward. Jed began to crawl, his elbow joints bashing against the metal surface beneath him. It came as a shock, only several metres in, for his elbows to sink into the pipe itself. The metal had changed to a living tube, supported by the same cartilage rings he'd come across before. It was lumpy and wet to crawl over, but much more forgiving on his elbows and knees. As he crawled, Jed wondered how much of the original pipework had been replaced by the bone engineers, and what other so-called improvements they had made. He also realised, as the pipe twisted and turned, that he had no idea where this pipe would come out. His phone only showed the drawings as built. It wouldn't have any of these changes on it. He could end up anywhere. Jed was soaked to the skin by the time he could go no further. The pipe ended in a weeping surface, producing so much mucus that he was lying half submerged. Grateful for Fox's knife, he cut the skin of the tube, hearing the mucus gush through the opening and splash onto the floor below. Carefully, Jed looked through the incision and found himself suspended in the middle of a room full of organic pipes. Strange growths were suspended from the ceiling in slings of skin, all of them feeding into tubes just like the one Jed was staring out of. He guessed this was where the cleaning mucus was created. He eased himself through the hole and took hold of one of the skin supports to steady himself. As he did so, a small tube fell away from the gland above, and bile-coloured liquid splashed down from the open end. Jed cursed. Swenson's poison had reached everywhere. He lowered himself, carefully avoiding the dripping bile, and pulled out his phone. He hoped it might give him some clue as to where he was, but as he wiped the mucus off the plastic case to peer at the screen beneath, it seemed as confused as he was. Once again, he was in a part of the building unconnected with the plans. He put the phone away and moved to the only door in the room. Could he really be in HR? The corridor outside seemed perfectly normal as Jed made his way down it. New HR didn't seem such a bad place after all. It was just like any other office floor in the tower, though strangely deserted, which suited him. However, as he rounded the bend at the end, he skidded to a halt as he almost collided into the back of a crowd filling a large vestibule. Thankfully, all their attention was focused on the far end. Jed was about to dart back out of sight when he caught a glimpse of a familiar suited figure emerging from a pitch-black doorway at the end of the vestibule. "Ladies and gentlemen," Swenson announced, looking relaxed and confident, and very different from when Jed had last seen him. "Thanks to the vigilance and hard work of our colleagues in yellow, I can confirm we now have all the strikers." There was a cheer from the crowd as a cameraman weaved his way around the chief executive. All of the people were wearing something orange, be it a tie, shirt or badge. The cheering then turned to catcalls and booing as the lift doors behind Swenson opened. Clarice, Graham and Katie were pushed from the lift towards the crowd. Even Graham looked terrified. "I shall personally oversee their interrogation in new HR," Swenson announced, to renewed cheers. Standing at the back of the crowded vestibule, there was nothing Jed could do as he watched the captives being pushed towards the shadowy entrance to new HR. He would just have to find another way in. Preoccupied, he turned to go, not realising someone had come up behind him. He bumped into the short-sleeved orange executive, covering the man's bare arm in mucus. The executive screamed in agony and fell to the floor. Suddenly, the crowd's focus changed from Swenson and his strikers to Jed. Hundreds of pairs of eyes stared at him as the man at his feet screamed for help. "It's him!" Swenson roared. "Enforcers!" Jed shot a glance at Clarice, Graham and Katie as the crowd parted to let the enforcers charge towards him, and ran. Executives dived out the way, desperate to avoid their colleague's fate, and for a moment Jed thought he might make it, only to crash into an immovable white object. The huge enforcer, who'd emerged from the corridor at the back, grabbed Jed in gloved hands, and kicking uselessly, Jed was lifted into the air and carried through the crowd across the vestibule. In the background, the man was still yelling. "Inside, now!" Swenson barked. "And clear that crowd!" Jed was propelled into the black opening that was new HR. Thank you very much for listening to The Rainbow Tower. To see more of R H Stewart's excellent artwork, you'll find him on Instagram at roy.hootson.stewart. For Alex Tymms, why not try the novel OutCaste at ao3.com? Or, for something completely different, check out the Amier series on YouTube or at amier.com, also by Alex Tymms. The Rainbow Tower. Text copyright Alex Tymms. Illustrations copyright R H Stewart. The right of Alex Tymms and R H Stewart to be identified as the author and illustrator of this work has been asserted in accordance with the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988.